Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is gonna be a cheap art supply challenge. I got this watercolor painting set from my local Tuesday Morning for just $7, and it comes with everything. It comes with paintbrushes, a pencil, watercolor paint, even masking fluid, and I've never used masking fluid before, so this would be interesting. It even comes with some watercolor paper. So here's 10 sheets of watercolor paper. I think this is hot press. I don't know, it feels really thin and also sort of cheapy. I don't know, I think this would warp a lot with watercolor, but I guess we'll see. And oh, they only gave me one tracing paper, I guess. There's also a couple booklets in here, just a flyer of what Daler Rowley provides other than watercolor, and also a little booklet of what you get and different watercolor techniques. I pretty much know the basics. I will probably have to look up how to use the masking fluid though. So it comes with 1 ounce of masking fluid. I actually think 1 ounce is gonna last me probably a lifetime, depending on how much I use it. It also comes with a basic pencil and eraser, 2B pencil. Comes with 2 brushes. One of them is, oh, it doesn't say, but I think this is a round brush, and this is just a fan brush for doing leaves and stuff, backgrounds. These feel kind of cheap, so I'm not going to expect too much of the performance of these brushes, but brushes pretty much are, like, for the most part, perform similarly. And then it comes with this really cute little watercolor set. There are a total of 12 colors, and they comes with a teeny tiny paintbrush. Hold on. Alright. This also feels very cheap, but the only thing I'm worried about is they didn't give a white, so that might cause problems, but yeah, so the instructions say to mix the paint in this palette, which will be a challenge because it keeps flipping up, but I think I can do it. I guess for the white, I'm just gonna have to use the white of the paper and try to see if I can get a clear wash over whichever areas I want to keep white. So to start off the sketching, the instructions actually said to draw on tracing paper and to transfer the sketch to the watercolor paper, and that's because if you start sketching out on watercolor paper and you keep erasing over and over again, it will stain the paper. So I tried doing that. I first drew on the tracing paper that they gave in the pack, and I tried turning it over and rubbing it on the other side to transfer the image, and it was not working out. I think because I was drawing too lightly maybe. So I flipped it over, I traced it over again, and I kept doing it, and it just wasn't helping that much. It did transfer a little, but it was too faint for me to see the sketch, so I just ended up using my laptop as like a light box and transferring the sketch that way. The pencil they gave was decent. The eraser was really bad quality. It kept shredding itself whenever I tried to erase with it. But the paper surprisingly held up pretty good, even though it was very thin, and I was apprehensive about how much it would warp and stuff, but it didn't warp that much. And I did cut out a strip from the side to test it out with my watercolor markers, and it did work pretty well. It blended very nice and smoothly, and the ink from the watercolor markers stayed wet on this paper for a long time, much longer than even my hot press watercolor paper that I like using with my watercolor markers. this was also my first time using masking fluid, and it smells pretty bad. It smells like burnt rubber, but and I wasn't sure how to apply it. I was thinking maybe if I water it down a little bit, it will let some of the watercolor show through, but unfortunately I was wrong about that, and just in general, I didn't really know how to use it, so I was just slapping it on everywhere. The actual watercolor paints themselves were really good quality. It felt really buttery and smooth, not like those Dollar Tree kind of watercolors, but also the brushes, though, were not good quality. The bristles kept falling out as I was painting with them, and as I was wetting them, it just kept falling out, and I kept having to pull them out with a tissue here and there. So that did get annoying from time to time. But in general, it did lay on pretty well. I discovered that the round brush that I was using wasn't letting me get into really fine detail, so I stopped using that, and I started using just the really teeny brush that came with the palette. It came in with the palette, and I was able to get a whole lot more detail. However, I did not use the fan brush that much. I was trying to use it on the curtain because it's a larger area of color to fill, but it kept pushing the watercolor in areas that I didn't want it to go. So I stopped using that brush, and I think it's only best for like stuff that's random, so like trees or like rocks, or mainly in backgrounds. Not if because I was mainly doing a very detailed background, and that wasn't the best option for me, so I just went with the tiny brush for most of it. This was my very first watercolor illustration. I usually, mostly for my watercolors, I use my Tim Holtz Distress watercolor markers, and with markers you have a lot more control, and I would just doodle them here or there. I never actually made an entire image out of them, so this was a good learning experience for me. I do really love watercolor because they're very versatile. Once you like put a wrong color somewhere, you can just, and it ends up drying, you can just apply more water and that would reactivate the color, and you can easily pick it up with a tissue and apply new washes here and there. So I really love the versatility of it. The only problem is if water or a damp liquid happens to touch your watercolor drawing, it will reactivate the ink, and the ink might either like start pooling in areas or just like start moving around, which you probably don't want. You want it to be permanent. So in terms of subject matter, I'm drawing my main character for a adventure game that I was thinking of, and her main role is to collect like cursed items from around like different areas and bring them back to a shopkeeper that was sort of like tricked into keeping all these cursed items in his shop, and some of them got sold to these other people. So the whole idea of the game is for the main character to go around and collect these cursed objects, but as soon as she collects an object, then it curses her. So she needs to she also stays at a library, so she needs to read up on what is going on with these items and how to properly remove them. And mostly in adventure games, the main character usually has to collect stuff, like whether it be ingredients for some sort of concoction or like materials to build something. It's always collecting and like gathering stuff to put in their endless pockets, so I thought this would be a good idea for a game. So what's happening here is that she collected these two gargoyle fingers, and they somehow attach themselves to her hand, and she's getting really worried as to how this is going to turn out, so she's reading up on what's going to happen. But yeah, so I just incorporated some creepy elements into the background. I put like a really scary mannequin on the left side, and on the right side you can't really see it, but there's like a gargoyle sitting on top of a tower. It is really hard to see because it's kind of washed out, but so the shelf behind her was not supposed to be that colorful. I was just playing around with different, because I knew the watercolor was very versatile, so wherever I was putting the color I wasn't like worried too much about it because I could easily shift it around here and there. So it turned out that the shelf behind her sort of looks like a xylophone, which I was not intending, but it still looks pretty cool and colorful. So I did a little research on the watercolor paper, and this is actually student grade watercolor. It's not specifically cold or hot press, it's just student grade. So mostly watercolor paper is handmade, either handmade or mold made. So made from a mold. It's not factory made, which makes sense because when I was doing my paper comparison, I realized that my watercolor markers were working really well on my handmade paper rather than my professional factory-made papers or sketchbooks. So it makes perfect sense that it would work better on like handmade paper. What you do have to worry about is whether the paper has cotton in it, because 100% cotton is mostly recommended for watercolor paper, but student grade is actually, it is factory made, but it's made to replicate watercolor paper, so it's not the same as watercolor paper, but it can like give you effects similar to it, so that it's for like people to practice on pretty much. So I did realize that student grade watercolor paper work really well with markers. So even though I don't think it works that well with paint because I've got some splotchiness here and there, it wasn't blending that smoothly in some areas, and the texture just gets in the way of showing some of the color of from the watercolor paint. But I feel like with watercolor markers it would be much easier because there's no mixing, and so there won't be excess water when you're putting it on the paper. In total, this watercolor painting took me about 3 to 4 hours. It should not have taken me that long because it is like the size of it is just a little bit bigger than a postcard, but it was my first watercolor painting, so I was playing around here and there with the color. I kept re-wetting it and picking it up as I found flaws here and there. But I'm definitely going to save this paper for my Tim Holtz Distress watercolor markers because I think, in my opinion, it works much better with those. Also, I don't have that much practice with mixing paints and stuff, and the palette did only have 12 colors, so it did involve me mixing a whole lot, and that brought some complications, and I feel like that was the main reason why it took me so long to complete this illustration. But definitely if I was using markers, it would take me half the time to complete this illustration. Alright, so in general, I think I do like the final product. I think it looks really nice and colorful. I like the watercolor effect here and there. The only thing I don't like is like probably the texture showing through. But everything else, in general, it looks decent for my first attempt. Lastly, I took my discount needlepoint ballpoint pen to make the outlines because the watercolor just like I couldn't get that accurate of a line just with the black and the thinnest watercolor paintbrush they gave me. So I used my discount needlepoint pen to do the outline. It was pretty cheap. It comes in a set of 5 for $3.99, so each pen ends up being less than $1. So in general, and the watercolor paint set was altogether $7. So altogether, I spent less than $9 to make this illustration. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.